Welcome back to our High Strangeness and Parapsychology, Exploring the Deep Weird Symposium. My name is Mark Frusin, and I'll be your host for this session. This session features Samantha Lee Treasure's presentation about out-of-body experiences in the screen age, discussing how OBE environments are recently reflecting our cultural shift towards the virtual world, and how those shifting trends have taken social media by storm in the past few years. Samantha is an anthropology student at SOAS University of London. I apologize if I didn't say that properly, and is currently based in Busan, South Korea. Her research focuses on out-of-body experiences and sleep paralysis, and she's delivered talks on these topics since 2013 in Japan, Russia, and the United Kingdom. Her first book, Exploring the Effects of Technology and Fiction on a Variety of Supernatural and Hallucinatory Experiences, is due to be released with Inner Traditions in 2023. All right, we'll show the video presentation now, and Samantha will join us for the Q&A shortly afterwards. Enjoy.
For watching my talk on out-of-body experiences, I'm sorry that this is pre-recorded, but as you're watching this in the symposium, it is currently 3 o'clock in the morning in South Korea, but I will be up, albeit probably in my pajamas at 3:45 a.m. To do the Q&A, so stick around. So I was interested in out-of-body experiences since a young age because my brother had them, my little brother had them. My mom also had one when she was a toddler, and I would go through the occult section at the library and look for astral projection techniques. And then finally, I was able to do it. Then I studied anthropology to learn more about how other people experience this and how they interpret it. And so this talk is based on new trends that I've been noticing over the past few years of fictional content in out-of-body experiences. And that's kind of unusual, unlike in dreams where you can dream about anything that you see. Out-of-body experiences tend to be a lot more realistic and stable and involve supernatural encounters with spirit guides or shadow people or deceased loved ones and that kind of thing. So I'm going to be exploring that in this talk, and I hope that I convince you of the increasingly weird world of out-of-body experiences in our screen age. Out-of-body experiences or astral projection, the intentional out-of-body experience, has become increasingly popular in media. So it's in comics, cartoons, on TV, and in films, often dramatized. And it's also becoming more of a popular subject in academia. Usually it will focus on the self or the body. I wasn't really able to find anything on supernatural encounters in OBEs, so I focused my bachelor's dissertation on that subject. My sort of justification for that was that there's a lot of literature on how dream characters affect beliefs and supernatural agent formation, but not really anything in the literature about OBE figures. And particularly because some studies have found that people treat OBEs as objectively real, that they can share it with others, whereas dreams, even lucid dreams, are more imaginary. So they will generally treat their figures in dreams as imaginary, whereas OBE figures are generally treated as real. So I was exploring this more. So just to kind of give you an overview of what the OBE actually is, it can usually start from one or two ways. So one is that if you start in the physical body and then there might be symptoms of exit, such as vibrations or loud noises, and then the feeling of floating away or somehow exiting from the body. And you're generally in your immediate surroundings. It seems to be very stable and realistic, unlike a dream, and time seems to progress in a linear fashion. The other way that it can start is after a period of unconsciousness, so just blackout, no memory, and you suddenly find yourself either floating up on the ceiling or from a different point of view than your physical eyes. It can happen anytime as well. So during the wakefulness or anytime during the sleep cycle, usually when you're going to sleep or when you're waking up, but it can also happen in the middle of the night or during naps from dreams and from sleep paralysis. And in terms of what triggers OBEs, many things. So it can be from strong emotion like stress or fear or even bliss. Meditation, so whether you're intentionally trying to do this or not, you can cause an OBE. And drugs or trauma and medical conditions as well. It can happen while running or during an accident, during monotonous or repetitive actions like typing or driving. And the psychological model of why this happens is that our mind is constantly updating our reality model and it's crafting models of the world. And whatever the most stable model is, it treats that as the real one. But sometimes this model can become confused, or the cognitive system becomes confused, when the sensory information coming in is either overwhelming or insufficient or contradictory. So because it's unstable, the mind switches into a backup copy of reality, which is based on memory and imagination. And that's one reason why the environment seems so stable and so realistic, because it is literally using the same or very similar reality models that we're using when we're awake. So a lot of people will have an OBE and they might think that they're awake the whole time until something happens, like a little glitch or the doorknob is a different shape or something like that. So it's important to also say that OBEs have been really stigmatized, and one of the reasons is because it's been treated in psychiatric and medical literature as associated with different pathologies or with trauma or PTSD. But it is not a pathology in itself, it is a symptom. So that psychological model kind of destigmatizes it in a way. It's something that can happen based on the senses, the state of the senses, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. The other reason that it's stigmatized is because it's had a long association with mysticism. But Celia Green, who did a survey of the general UK population in the 60s, found that OBEs can happen to anybody, and it often happens to people that have no belief or no interest in mysticism or spirituality. And they don't necessarily see the experience as spiritual either. The OBE is also really eerie. If we take Mark Fisher's definition as a failure of absence or a failure of presence, and that at the heart of eerie experiences is the question of agency, that there's an as yet unrevealed entity somewhere. And there is this kind of sense of sometimes people will go out of body and then they'll see something on their coffee table that they don't own, or they never put it there, or a note or something. And one of my interlocutors got out of body and she saw red writing on her bedroom window, and she tried to read it but she couldn't, and she got up and she tried to have another out of body experience, and the writing was still there, but she still couldn't figure out what it was trying to say. So there's this sense sometimes of, is it a message for me? Did I do it? Is it from my subconscious? Is it from a spirit? And one of the really weird things about OBEs, which I haven't ever heard of in another state, is seeing somebody who seems to be there in the physical environment, but they can't see or hear you. So it's like you're a ghost. And then it gets even weirder sometimes because sometimes they can see you and they act as though you're a ghost, they act terrified. And I've heard quite a few of those reports. This is one of my interviewees describing what it feels like to have out-of-body experiences. Her name's Tree Carr, and she's had over 100 OBEs, and she teaches how to dream and how to have out-of-body experiences.
It's weird. It's just like you feel like a ghost. It's like you're in this weird isolation zone and there's no spark. Like, I don't know, it's just you're a ghost. So it always feels weird going there. It doesn't feel like, awesome, I'm home now. Like, it doesn't.
Right.
Yeah, it always feels a bit like, ooh.
Okay. So there are also sometimes people who are not physically present. And then those people you tend to be able to engage with. It's like they're in the same psychic space as you or something. So you could go into your living room and see people hanging out there and talk to them. And the way that some experiencers explain this is that maybe they are seeing the people that are going to live there in the future or in the past, or they're living there in a parallel universe. Or they could also be other dreamers or other astral projectors. And sometimes people will ask their names and say, can you find me on Facebook or something? And I haven't heard of any successful case yet, but we keep trying. There's also people who report seeing pets and animals in general, especially cats and spiders, especially shadow spiders. Although I've also heard of a giant blue glowing spider. And then you kind of get into more supernatural folkloric figures. The spirit guide is often reported a being that just feels like a guide or acts like a guide and shows you something. And then you get things like trolls or yeti. They're not that common, but I have come across quite a few reports. And then this isn't really talked about that much, which I feel is a kind of a shame. People try to just talk about the positive out-of-body experiences that they have, but there's no shame in having scary OBEs either. It's definitely not all love and light. There are a lot of reports of shadow beings, which are also common in sleep paralysis reports. They tend to be threatening, and they also tend to be male. Although I have heard of a couple of men who have said they've also experienced female shadow beings. And then there's things like alien greys, whether they're benevolent or not. So the themes that I found in my dissertation were that they generally tended to either, when they engaged with the person, energize or heal, or especially for shadow beings, drain a person's energy or attack them. And then to teach or guide the person. And when they just seem to be other people, they could be seen as lost souls, especially if they seem confused or like they were sleepwalking, other travelers or dreamers, or, as I mentioned, people from other times or other dimensions. And I wanted to just make a note here that I mentioned some of the reasons why OBEs seem very realistic. And those things are usually cited as the reasons why OBEs can have such a big impact on beliefs, but that's not the only reason. So most of the people I've spoken to who have had OBEs have also experienced either telepathy or clairvoyance or something psychical like that in their OBEs. For example, my stepmother, she had 3 OBEs, 2 in a fast food joint when she fainted, and she could hear everything and see the paramedics and all of that. And then the 3rd time, she was just sleeping as normal, and she came out of her body, and she went downstairs. She saw my sister come in from work, and she said hi to my sister, and my sister just ignored her and walked past. And so she followed her, and she could see everything that she was doing. And then the next morning, she told my sister, and she confirmed everything, like the time that she came in and exactly where she went and what she did. So there's a lot of reports like this. Like I said, most of the people that I've spoken to will open up about these experiences. So that's another reason why they have such a big impact. But then it can be really difficult for people to tell what is real and what isn't, what is the imaginary content. And this is kind of where fictional things come in as well. So they don't always have a strong effect. Sometimes people will have an OBE and it's just meh, or it's a short one, or they don't have a word for it, so they just kind of put it on the back burner. It can also sometimes have a reduced fear of death, although if you see kind of dark creatures like this, you might wonder what the psychical or spiritual world really consists of, and you might get nervous about what happens after death. So I've had a situation like that, like my first adult OBE, there were 3 men in my flatmate's room, and my mom suggested that they might have been Scientologists because she saw a documentary that they go out of body and like stalk people or something. So that wasn't very it wasn't very comforting, and I don't really know where I stand on how I feel about the afterlife now. But the question is, when people see fictional content, how does that affect their beliefs that they already have, especially when they've already had quite a few kind of more classic OBEs? So generally, there's 3 ways that people interpret, say, seeing a cartoon character, and we'll get to some of those reports in a minute. One is thought forms. So they might think that whether it's, your own thought or other people's thoughts, they manifest in the same objective astral space. And another one is originals, and this is a really interesting one, that the writers of fictional characters were only merely tapping into something that was already out there in the ether, something that already exists in a parallel universe or somewhere out there in space. And so when they see, Mickey Mouse or something, they're actually tapping into the soul of Mickey Mouse. And then the other one is shapeshifter, that there is a sentient being behind that figure, but it's not what it appears. And that's pretty common in dreams too. You can have a dream of your friend, but it doesn't look like your friend, but you know that it is, it just feels like them. And that is also quite common in OBEs too. And this anthropologist, Robin Sharif, she found that media content in dreams is also increasing a lot, at least among US college students. And she says that she thinks it's because the stock locations that make up our dream scenarios are being muted by our virtual behaviors. So for example, when you're at the dining room table, how many of us are actually not really physically present, or not mentally present, but we're scrolling on our phones. So more and more of that content is making its way into our dreams, just as it is with out-of-body experiences too. And there are a lot more New Age gurus and new religious movement leaders talking about astral projection as it becomes more and more popular. This guy on the lower right, he says everybody's talking about astral projection these days, but his take on it is most of it is just a hallucination. The guy on the top left is the leader of Eckankar, which is a new religious movement founded in the 60s that revolves around soul travel. But they generally tend to interpret the figures they see in OBEs as a form that the Mahanta is taking, that the living Ekmaster is taking to engage with them. And then Teal Swan, she mentions very briefly that you can create things in these astral spaces, including cartoons. But she, to my knowledge, she doesn't really go into that in detail. Trump as a light worker, you might have seen that and wondered what that was. Somebody sent me a link to a Facebook personal page of an OBE instructor who said that he had seen Donald Trump in one of his astral projections. He saw Trump as he was sleeping, and there was a guide watching him there, a guard, and the guard just let him sort of be there. So he felt like he was cool with Donald Trump because his guard was okay with him being there. And somebody commented that Trump is a powerful light worker. So I thought that was quite interesting that the figures from public life can also make their way into OBEs. And I've also heard people say that they've seen their OBE instructor too, and it tends to confirm for them that instructor's spiritual powers. So this is the experience from my dissertation that sort of put me on this quest for fictional OBE encounters. So this is Paul Wolski, and I will let you listen to his experience of Mickey Mouse.
This was actually around at the time. It was either just before or just after the experience I mentioned earlier about requesting a fearful experience so I could face my own fear, so I could overcome and pursue the OBE stuff. Yeah. I've come out of my body and the walls around me have gone like, almost like I'm in a nightclub, yeah, and there's this like, it's all flashing, and I look at the walls and it's like, there's all these like, I want to use the word trippy imagery, yeah, it's like, what do they call it when you project these lights on the wall, something to do with like oil lamps, maybe, loads of colours all coming out of the wall. It was like I was off it on magic mushrooms, yeah, but the whole room's like glowing like strobe light, and it's all beautiful, there's all these amazing patterns coming out of the wall, so I looked to that wall, there's all these mad patterns on that wall, and it's fucking beautiful, and I can hear some kind of like music. And I look to the end of my bed, and Mickey Mouse is absolutely raving his tits off. It's like some kind of beats. It's like looking at me like just like dancing away. Yeah.
Like, where did you think about that? How did you kind of like reconcile that with your other experiences and your beliefs and all?
Well, it was like an experience I've never had before. But again, on this one, I didn't really feel threatened of it. Yeah, like, as you know, I've had these experiences where these shadow beings have attacked me, this demonic thing that is like threatening me, other energies which are very sort of like get away from me. This thing was like, yeah, and again, like many of my OBEs, it's a bit hard to process when you're in it. I just kind of observed it. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is really cool.
This next one is an interview I did about a month ago in South Korea. And when Minjin was 15, he had 2 OBEs a few days apart because of this technique, if you can call it that he and his friends were doing on each other. But I definitely want to warn people against doing anything like this in order to get an OBE. There's definitely a lot easier and safer ways of doing it. So yeah, here's his account.
내가 한 15살? 3학년 때쯤인가 반 친구들이 어떤 학생을 앉혀가지고 요 목 동맥 살짝 누르면서 장난을 치는데 애가 갑자기 기절을 하는 거예요. 그래서 애들이 막 뺨을 막 때리면서 다시 깨워. 그거 보고 신기해가지고 나도 저게 무슨 기분일까, 어떤 느낌일까 궁금해서 그 친구 보고 나도 한번 해달라고 했어요. 기절했는데 갑자기 눈을 딱 깜빡하면서 딱 떴는데 꿈 같아요. 꿈. 몸이 붕 뜨는 기분. 하늘, 그때 느낌으로 하늘 한 20m, 30m 정도 붕 떠서 이렇게 싹 나르는 느낌인데 주변 환경이 실물이 아니고 애니메이션, 그림 같은 느낌이었어요. 나무도 이렇게 둥글둥글, 유치원생들이 나무 그릴 때 이렇게 동그랗게 그리듯이 색깔도 크레파스로 이렇게 색칠한 그런 약간 그런 느낌. 그리고 길이 이렇게 언덕에 이렇게 꾸부렁꾸부렁 언덕식으로 이렇게 펼쳐져 있는 걸 내가 그냥 나는 기분이었어요. 한 느낌상 한 10초에서 한 15초 정도? 그러다가 갑자기 깼어요. 애들이 뺨을 따다다닥 때려가지고. 처음에는 이렇게 동글동글하게 느껴졌다면 그때는 이제 빼쪽빼쪽하게 그렇게 느껴졌어요, 나무가. 근데 그때는 되게 한 6초 정도 만에 깬 것 같아요. 금방 깼어요, 그때. 색깔 자체가 좀, 그러니까 해가 반쯤 졌다고 해야 되나? 한 날씨 그 시간대로 하면 한 4시 5시쯤 되면 좀 어둡잖아요. 그늘진 것 같이 어둡잖아요.
So there were a few different factors that seem to influence OBE content. Changes over time. So one way is throughout the OBE, if it's a long OBE, like I mentioned, sometimes it can start out off very realistic and then become a little bit more dreamlike, or maybe vice versa, but there can be some changes over time. One thing that I hear a lot is the OBE can start out as very dark, difficult to see, maybe even difficult to move. It feels like you're walking through molasses. And then as the experience progresses, it becomes clearer and brighter and easier to move around. Another one is over the lifetime. So all of the people that I talked to for my dissertation said that when they were kids, even though it might have seemed like somebody might have been present when they were having an OBE, they didn't see any figures. But as they became more adept at OBEs in their adulthood, they started to see more and more figures and having more meaningful encounters. So I thought that's interesting because there's a parallel with dream research that dreams develop with age as well, becoming more complex. And the other one, which we'll get into in a moment as well, is changes across generations. So there will be some differences from person to person and from culture to culture and different religions, possibly in the content, definitely in the interpretation. But I think that OBEs are going to just become more and more interesting the more technology and media and fiction we consume. The other factor is whether it's deliberate or spontaneous. There have been a couple of studies done that showed that the more deliberate OBEs will have less accurate information. So you might have an out-of-body experience and see something on a rooftop and you go and check the next day and it's not there. Whereas spontaneous OBEs tend to reflect reality more for some reason. But talking to OBEers and asking them if they've had deliberate or spontaneous experience is not really straightforward. A lot of people will say that they're not sure because they tried to have an OBE and they didn't have one at the time, but maybe later on, the next day or a week later or something, they'll have one and it seems spontaneous, but I would propose that this is like a third type of OBE, programmed, pre-programmed, or kindled. And so in terms of generational changes, there is a new practice called shifting, and this really got very popular during the pandemic lockdown period, especially the summer of 2020. And shifting basically uses astral projection techniques and as a way of incubating an astral projection experience with scripting and visualization. So the scripting is basically they'll write down what they want their experience to be like, as if they are they're going to play out a movie. And funnily enough, most shifters actually do attempt to project into a TV world or a film world. And one of the most popular ones, at least as of 2020 was Harry Potter, and the most popular goal seemed to be to have a date with Draco Malfoy, which I don't understand at all because he was not a very nice character. And so there's this kind of trifecta of, very heavy media consumption during lockdown and like social distancing. So our parasocial relationships are becoming stronger and more important. And then these astral projection techniques, as well as these like dream incubation practices. So this is sort of, there's a lot of TikTokers who share their experiences and their attempts and their practices. So this sort of is a good illustration of what they do. So they script, they visualize, they do their practice in their bedroom. And this was the most popular comment that I came across. So someone said, Gen Z really said, I hate it here, and left. And someone replied to that saying, the government told us to stay home and we shifted to another reality. And then the person commented to that saying, I mean, technically we are home to Hogwarts. And some of the shifters I talked to said that they use it as a kind of therapy because of everything going on in the world and they can't handle it and they just need, it's not like an escape exactly to them, it's a coping strategy. And they don't want, even if they have a very good social community around them, they don't want to burden others with their problems because everyone else has problems. But at the same time, they don't have access to therapy either for financial reasons or because there's a really long waiting list. The interesting thing was that I'm not sure as of 2022, but as of the last 2 years, shifting was really popular, especially in Canada, the US, Turkey, France, Hungary, the UK, and Spain. But it wasn't so popular in countries like Japan or Korea. And the link there, I think, is that the countries where shifting was more popular were countries with more lockdown rules, and there wasn't really a lockdown per se in Japan or Korea. People were still able to meet up with their friends, albeit, wearing masks and with certain limitations, but a lot of things were still open around here. So this is a montage of people that have shifted successfully. So mostly teenage girls that are interested in this, but there's also some adults and some guys as well.
Cause my insides are red and yours are too, and the red on my face is matching you, and goodness, you're bleeding, what a wonderful feeling, you're down and you're bleeding.
You get the idea. So a lot of people, especially older generations like me and others, a lot of people will say, oh, they're just dreaming, they're lucid dreaming or something like that. However, they often have the same markers of OBEs, so vibrations and floating and the loud noises. So I think it's important to look at this with an open mind. And in my personal opinion, I think that they have created a custom-made altered state of consciousness that suits their own culture, their own generation, and their own needs. And that takes into account the importance of parasocial relationships and media, just in their own lives and as well for their mental health. So I think that this is something that I think there's a lot that can be researched around this topic and not just dismissed like a lot of people are doing. Some people will also say, oh, they just want views, or because if they get more views, they can possibly monetize their accounts. But I don't know. I mean, I've spoken to quite a few shifters, and they seem really genuine to me. So, yeah, I think that this is probably a different state of consciousness, or like a hybrid state of consciousness. So, Susan Blackmore wrote a paper on deliberate OBEs, she said there's three skills needed for them. And the reason why I'm saying this now is because I think this is what they're doing is deliberate OBEs, but just with slightly tweaked. So the first skill is the ability to disrupt or ignore sensory input, a letting go of the world. 2 is the ability to construct a viable alternative model from information in memory, so to imagine it. And number 3, the ability to attend to the imaginary model rather than the sensory model. And these 3 points are really at the core of shifting practices. So they're achieved through the ability to let go of the world through meditation and focus that they do, scripting and visualization, and 3, the capacity for absorption or the ability to kind of block out the distractions that are going on while you are focused on something. And there are also a lot of people who have been trying to shift, and they can't do it. And some of the papers in biology and anthropology about looping or cultural kindling theory say that even if a practice is practiced by everyone in the community, not everyone is necessarily going to have that altered state of consciousness that it's aiming for, because it's not just a cultural thing. It also depends to an extent on the person's personal biology. So some people will be able to have this experience more than others, or maybe they just need to find a different technique to hack into that biology. And I thought that the way that different generations engage with our media might also influence the way that we engage with altered states of consciousness, because for me, growing up with 4 channels and 3 siblings, I only had access to whatever was on at the moment. And a lot of people in my generation, when we astral travel, we will defer to the wisdom of that space and we'll explore it and see what's there. Whereas shifters are incubating the spaces that they want to go to. They're really trying to aim for certain places, which in a way is kind of similar to shamanism, to some shaman practices that directly want to go to a specific place. It's just for them, it's Hogwarts. So they have grown up with streaming and internet, where anything that comes into mind they can access, basically. So that's another possibility. But yeah, I hope that this has convinced you that OBEs are very weird, and they're probably only going to get weirder. If you're interested in this, or if you've had similar experiences, feel free to get in touch. This is my email, my Instagram, and my blog, and you can get in touch with me any of those ways. And thank you very much for listening, and please enjoy the rest of the symposium, and I shall be joining you for the Q&A session shortly.